All right, well, it is the top of the hour, so we will get started today. So hello, everyone. It's so nice to see you all, and thank you all so much for joining us today for Social Science is Rad. It's just maybe the best webinar title that we've had in a while, so I really appreciate that. So this webinar is hosted by the North Central Climate Adaptation Science Center, which is also called the North Central CASC or the NC CASC, and we are based here at the University of Colorado Boulder. So this is one of our first social science webinars. And again, I'm really excited that we're presenting this great research. My name is Heather Yoakum, and I am the social science lead here at the NCCASC. And I co-host this webinar with my colleague Imtiaz Ringwala, who is the climate science lead. And so we at the CASC bring you these webinars to facilitate a discussion of science, research, and best practices related to adaptation and natural resource management under a rapidly changing climate. And we have a focus on the North Central US, and that really encompasses the Missouri and the upper Colorado River basins. So before I introduce our speakers today, just a quick word on logistics and housekeeping. So we are recording this webinar, and you can find all of our webinar recordings on our website. And during the webinar, all of you will be muted, but you will have the ability to unmute during the Q&A period at the end of the presentation. If you have questions during the presentation, please put those questions in the chat box. Imtiaz and I will be monitoring those, and we will start with those questions first during the Q&A period. And we'll go in the order that they were received. So we'll end the formal part of this webinar at noon Mountain Time, and we'll stop the recording at that point. But anyone who wishes to stay on and kind of have a more informal conversation with our speakers is encouraged to do so. So please stick around if you can. So now I am very delighted to introduce our three speakers for the day, Dr. Catherine Clifford, Dr. Amanda Cravens, and Dr. Corinne Knapp. Katie Clifford, I should say your full name, even though I know you. Katie is a human geographer who studies human-environment relationships in the context of environmental change. Her research blends a mix of methods, approaches, and theoretical frameworks to integrate theory and practice, aiming to engage with big questions within social science, while also supporting climate adaptation, policy change, and real-world impacts. She has expertise in risk and hazards, in climate adaptation, political ecology, science and technology studies, environmental management, knowledge co-production, and policy analysis. Katie is currently the social science lead for Western Water Assessment, a NOAA CAP or RISA team here at the University of Colorado, and their mission is to produce usable information to support regional climate adaptation in Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah. Katie received her BA at Macalester College and her master's and doctoral degrees in geography from the University of Colorado Boulder. Sorry, I got to scroll down here. There's a lot of you today. And Dr. Amanda Cravens is a research social scientist at the USGS Forest and Rangeland Ecosystem Science Center. Amanda's interdisciplinary research interests include the translation of scientific information into decision-making, policies and institutions that influence environmental management, and understanding the cognitive and social processes that make decision support tools work effectively. Amanda's disciplinary training includes geography, policy and institutional analysis, and the learning sciences. Her research spans resource areas with recent and current projects focused on decision support for coastal hazards, human dimensions of ecological drought, socioeconomic aspects of water availability, and land manager decision-making in the face of ecological transformation. And she is also very interested in the practice of interdisciplinary science and has served as a member of multiple working groups, as well as published on the role of creativity in science. And last, but certainly not least of our speakers today, Dr. Corinne Knapp. She is an assistant professor in the Haub School of Environment and Natural Resources. She used to work in our state at Western Colorado University in Gunnison, which is a great place to be, where she'd been a faculty member in the School of Environment and Sustainability, and a founding member of the Masters of the Environmental Management program. Her research interests are the confluence of climate change, conservation, and livelihoods. So using a social ecological approach, she works in climate change adaptation, on local and indigenous knowledge and sense of place, and also conservation innovation. And she has a deep commitment and passion for Western landscapes, rangelands, and the human and ecological communities that depend on them. She's interdisciplinary by training, like all of our folks here today, which is so great. And in addition, she's interested in the theory of research and practice, how research is used in real-world applications, and how education can better prepare students to contribute meaningfully to managing complex challenges. So her current projects include understanding drought decision-making by individual ranchers and rangeland organizations, exploring compound hazards and climate change-related research needs in Wyoming, and assessing the equity of deliberate social ecological transformations. So in addition, she is currently serving as the chapter lead for the Northern Great Plains region chapter of the National Climate Assessment, which is a massive job. And I feel like I kind of buried the lead there, Corey. So sorry about that. But with that, thank you very much, all three of you, for being here today. And I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. So again, I'm Katie. I'm going to start, and we're going to be going back and forth between my co-presenters and I. So we'll get started with social science is rad. Also want to note that we're presenting work from Wiley Carr and Gabby Antonova too. So there we go. So ecological transformation. We are seeing a new and more intense anthropogenic pressures that are changing environmental systems and landscapes. And ecological transformation is an extreme type of impact characterized by significant and primarily irreversible or somewhat irreversible shifts in multiple ecological aspects, such as community composition, ecosystem function, and others, rather than, say, a discrete species impact or a temporary ecosystem impact that might revert or bounce back. So, for example, this could include ghost forests like seen here, where we see sea level rise and saltwater infiltration begin to transform forests across a landscape, specifically killing trees and shifting distribution patterns. Yeah. And importantly, ecological transformation can happen along multiple ecological trajectories. It can occur incrementally, like you see here in the orangish color, with a relatively smooth trajectory of change. This might be, for example, something like an area becoming gradually hotter and more arid, slowly increasing gradually over time, or it can occur more abruptly in systems with thresholds, feedbacks, or through disturbances. For example, something like beetle outbreaks, fire, those are two disturbances that can lead to ecological transformation. And this can lead to large step or state changes. And we are confident that these types of transformations will continue to become more widespread as climate change pressures continue. And so in some places, this is already reality, and in others, the writing is on the wall that these kinds of transformations are something that we need to be thinking about and expecting. So the concern for ecological transformation is growing, and it's not just ecologists or research scientists who are concerned, but a broad range of public stakeholder partners who are asking questions about what this change means for them and what managers are going to do to protect these shared public resources and public lands and landscapes that have importance in a broad number of ways. Managers have traditionally operated under the guidance that focuses on managing for historical conditions, some sort of natural baseline, this idea that you manage much more of a stable system. But transformation can make that impossible in some cases. And many managers across geographies, resource types, system types are in a bind to where what type of management paradigms, practices, and approaches to use, particularly when the ones they traditionally have used might not be meeting the moment. So this gets to an important question. What are managers to do? They're increasingly confronting the limits of ecological resilience, an idea that systems will bounce back and confronting the prospect that, and even sometimes the reality that ecological transformation is either going to happen or happening now. And in many cases, they're being told to manage for change, not persistence, but they're grappling with the real question of what does that mean in practice? And this is where the RAD framework comes in. The RAD framework was developed by federal working groups of scientists and managers to identify different options available to managers when either encountering or preparing for ecological transformation. And this holds three main types of strategies. The first, and these are kind of buckets or broad categories. There can be multiple strategies within a category, but there are three broad different categories of the types of decisions a manager can make. They can resist change. And so if they resist, the question is, do they resist? And often that carries increasingly dramatic interventions to stop increasing pressures and directional change. Do they accept it and come to the decision that they're either okay or can tolerate future conditions that they expect from the trajectory of change without any intervention? Or do they begin to direct it? And this would mean actively intervening to try to steer changes to a set of desirable conditions. And a couple important things about this framework is first, these are all resist, accept, and direct are all engagements with an ecological trajectory. So this is specifically about resisting a change that you have mapped out or think will happen. It's not necessarily about resisting human behavior, et cetera. So there's complex dynamics in this. The second thing is that this framework is intentionally agnostic. And by that, it means there isn't a best decision. There isn't better or worse ones. There isn't a right or a wrong one. The idea is that context matters, and there's a number of variables, something that Corey will be sharing with us, that should be influencing these decisions. And so the framework does not state that one is better than the other. It is agnostic in that way. And then the last point is the goal of the framework, again, while being agnostic, is to suggest that managers, not that one is right or wrong, but that managers should consider all before making a decision, so that it shouldn't be a default decision, just going along with the way they've always done it, but they should really think through, grapple about how resist versus accept versus direct might look in their specific system. So managers, again, are already navigating these decisions either on the ground right now or thinking through as they prepare their management plans. And while the RAD framework is pretty new, in the last year or two, the work that we're sharing has been developed. These types of decisions have already been grappled with, and we can see this in some previous studies. So managers make RAD decisions about previous research has shown that they make RAD decisions about which is best, resist, accept, or direct. They make these decisions differently, even when presented with the same information in the same place. So I'll say that again. When managers in the same place, using the same information, think about RAD decisions, they come to different ones as which would be best in that system. And that indicates a few things to us as social scientists. First, that indicates that these decisions are not based just on ecological data. If that was the case, managers presented with the same suite of findings, projections, et cetera, sets of ecological data, they would theoretically come to the same decision. So first of all, these are not just ecological questions. And actually there are other things either constraining, pushing, pulling, influencing these decisions. The second is that that more and better data, sometimes what we as scientists like to think will help support and improve decisions, might not improve or even change these decisions because there's more influencing them than just the data. And then last, there isn't an objective right decision for a system, species, or place. So that raises this ultimately larger question that Corey and Amanda and I have been exploring for a while now, which is what factors influence RAD decisions, so that if we understand that, we can better think about how to support those decisions. So I'm going to pass this on to Corey, and Yeah.
Great. If you want to switch slides, Katie. So this is a model that Katie and Amanda and I published in 2022. And basically what this is trying to do is it's trying to outline what we think or hypothesize as the various factors that might be influencing a manager's decision-making. And so if you look here, we are conceptualizing the decision space as the space or the range of opportunities that a manager sees as possible for them. And it's influenced by the confluence of these two different things, this internal world, which is the manager's internal mental model, and the external factors that might impact decision-making, things like scientific uncertainty, institutional context, social feasibility, those sort of provide the boundaries or the limits on what a decision maker would think that their decision space was. And so this decision space is individual to each decision maker. So it's unique to that specific decision maker. And I'll unpack these two realms in the next few slides. So next slide. So first, I want to talk about these internal factors that are shaping RAD decisions. And so you can think about a mental model that a manager might have. And the three things that we are suggesting are really important there is their internalized sense of culture, their understanding of the ecological system personally, what they've seen, what they've experienced, and their worldviews. So the way that they see themselves and their place in the world and what they think correct behavior is in that place. And so if we go into culture, just as an example, you can imagine culture is something shared with other communities of practice. And so one example of how culture might influence someone's individual decision-making and their mental model could be social norms. So if you think of a manager that's embedded in an institution where there is a sense of we always resist. That is what we do. That could come in and inform the way that they think about their decision space. Also, managers are embedded in specific ecosystems and they have specific experiences of those ecosystems. So does this individual manager have experience of changes that are happening on the landscape? Do they think that those changes are large? Do they think that they need to be responded to? And so despite the fact that things might be happening in other ecosystems differently, within their own ecosystem, they're looking at their experience of that place. And then finally, we have worldviews, which is individual views about how the world works and their place within it. And so one thing that we could think about is how they define what natural is. And they might define what natural is. They might believe that nature or natural has to do with returning something to its historical norm, to some pre-contact, pre-European place, or it could be that they think of it as not intervening in that system, and that could be the worldview that they hold around what they think of as natural. And so a lot of features, as you can see in each of these boxes, are influencing each of these, and they also definitely overlap with one another and influence one another. But I will give you an example of this next slide. So this is just an example quote from a colleague's research that says, that's what I've always been taught through school and grad school and all my trainings, how to preserve and restore habitat for your species that you have. I guess that would be the way that I'm thinking. And so you see here how schooling has become embedded in the culture, the worldview, and also their understanding of what this system is and what it does. And so next I'll move to the external factors. And external factors shaping RAD decisions are things outside that individual. So they're things that influence and bound the type of decisions that people think that they can make. Things like scientific uncertainty, institutional context, and social feasibility. And so when we think of this, we can think of, first off, talking about scientific uncertainty. A manager may be within a context individually that has a lot of noise and low predictability. And they may feel like there's not sufficient knowledge or understanding to know how that system will interact both with the changes that they're seeing, but also with any intervention that they might do in that system. And so scientific uncertainty might limit the way that an individual feels like they can make decisions, or what sorts of decisions they can make. Institutional context are things like legal and policy constraints. They're things that set the bound on the types of actions that can happen in that space. And so certain actions based on the Endangered Species Act or wilderness regulations might change what they think is the suite of actions, or actually limit the suite of actions that they think they can do in a given space. And then finally, there's social feasibility. And while an individual manager might see that there's changes going on, that might feel like there's a need to change the way that they respond to those transformations that they're seeing on the ground, the opinions of the external world, stakeholders, neighboring communities, the public, might really shift and change what they think is feasible. And so if there's not the support from community members, if they're sensing resistance to new decisions, it might shift the decision space that they feel like they have. Next slide. So this is another example. Even when you've got willing partners, even when everyone wants to work together, you've got different entities with different missions, authorities, political landscapes, based on their institutional context, whether it's state, federal, or tribal. And this person saying that was their biggest challenge. So you're seeing here in this quote how for this manager, this institutional context and the suite of contexts that they're trying to navigate are really shifting what they feel is a viable decision space. So thank you. And I will pass this, I think, to Amanda. No, sorry.
I think yeah. And then Amanda, we're skipping around a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to be sharing work that builds right upon what Corey was sharing that was in another article. So we're sharing multiple articles or findings from multiple articles in a bioscience special issue on RAD. So this comes from the Magnus et al. Article. You can see the citation at the bottom. And I'm going to be sharing just a small portion of this that was led by Wiley Carr at the National Park Service Climate Change Response Program, and myself. And that is looking at upstream deliberative engagement. So the conceptual framework that Corey just presented helps us kind of think about these different components beyond just the ecological information that might be shaping these decisions. And it helps promote reflexivity, or the examination of one's own beliefs, judgments, and practices in the decision-making process. The conceptual model helps make these different factors explicit when they often remain implicit or invisible, but we know, again, these social, political, ethical factors influence our decision-making. So utilizing that knowledge of what is shaping it and bringing that into the process is where we get to upstream deliberative engagement. In this article, we proposed this as a way to open up and bring in these multiple factors explicitly into the decision-making process. And it provides a method that enables resource managers to make decisions in their own decision space, and the factors that shape that more visible, and explore some of these social and ethical factors explicitly. So upstream engagement specifically entails a dialogue among potentially affected people. That could be the public, stakeholder and rights holders, key affected groups, neighboring communities, about controversial issues in the early stages of developing options and advance of committing to certain management pathways. So this is moving public engagement earlier in the decision process before key assumptions have gotten locked in to various alternatives. Often, in a traditional sense, we engage folks when we have 3 or 4 management alternatives already designed and ask them to weigh in on which one they want. But the point of this is saying that actually we might come to some of the wrong decisions, or bringing in folks earlier, upstream, earlier in the process might help us come to different, more inclusive or better for multiple parties alternatives to decide amongst. And then in terms of deliberative methods, the second part of this, deliberative methods are a suite of meeting and process design approaches that encourage the exploration of these social and ethical issues alongside the scientific and technical questions. They are designed to create space for everyone involved and to explore their own decision space more thoroughly. So the point being is we often in these types of decisions have lots of debate, open dialogue about science and technical questions, how to evaluate uncertainty, which studies we should be basing it on, what the best available science is. But this is just saying that we should have that same kind of deliberative conversation about these other factors that we know are shaping these decisions, but do so invisibly or implicitly, and instead opening it up so that we can have a better shared understanding of either how all of those different factors are shaping a decision. So theories and methods about deliberative upstream engagement have come from the social sciences, particularly science and technology studies, and most often have been applied to technological issues like nanotech or geoengineering. But we think this holds a lot of potential in the realm of ecological transformation, and could be really important and help reduce some conflicts as we expect that could happen. So for RAD decisions, they're new and experimental. This is a phase of where managers are going to do their best, but there are chances of failure. There are new practices being done. That's a reason you want to bring people in early and bring in this upstream deliberative engagement. Another reason is these decisions are highly consequential, both for human and ecological communities. They're based on value judgments, and being explicit in those can help us make sure that those are the right types of value judgments, or that they're at least inclusive of different values. And ultimately, in the cases we're talking about, these are shared resources and public lands. So ensuring that folks who depend on, use, or have cultural ties to these spaces, resources, landscapes, have a say in it is really important. So I'm going to pass this to Amanda.
All right, so thank you to my co-presenters, and we are going to shift a little bit here. The first part of the presentation was about already completed and published work that really lays out conceptual thinking about this topic and this challenge. And now the second half of this, I'm going to tell you a little bit about work that is empirical, testing these ideas. However, it's also work that is very, very much in progress. So that's kind of the shift here. The kind of how we've been approaching this, we spent a lot of time with this interagency group that Katie mentioned, thinking conceptually, saying, okay, what are the important social institutional aspects that are affecting RAD decision-making? What might it look like at that high conceptual level? And then we started to say, okay, great, we have these ideas. Now, are we correct? What does it look like in practice? What are the real world experiences of the folks who are doing this on the ground? And I know that there's some of you on the call who are sitting in land management units with DOI partner agencies and asking those questions. So I really want to thank you for being here. And I really want to acknowledge that that is what we are hoping to do, particularly with this empirical piece that captures those experiences. We collected pilot data in the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska, and then the East Jemez landscape, New Mexico. That's a landscape scale project. The quotes that Corey was sharing were from that pilot data. And then what I'm going to talk about is the large scale cross case study that we are currently running. And I'm going to start with some acknowledgements, because this is a massive, amazing effort with a really large group of collaborators. It's co-funded by 3 of the CASCs, North Central, Northwest, and Northeast, and partners on the project there is a group of consulting scientists. Katie's still a part of that. And then that also includes the National Park Service Climate Change Response Program, Wiley Carr, Gregor Skurman, and Nate Stephenson, who is USGS Emeritus. The co-PIs, myself, Heather Yoakum, who's on the call, you probably know her in her guise as North Central CASC Stakeholder Engagement Lead, Brian Chaffin, who's at University of Montana, Julia Goolsby, who's at University of Colorado, Stefan Tangen, who is with North Central CASC, and then our Park Service partners for this very co-produced project, Karen Copper at North Cascades, Christy Brigham at Sequoia Kings Canyon, Abe Miller Rushing in Acadia, Dawn LaFleur at Glacier, who I think I saw on the call, Mike Durglow at the Confederated Salish Kootenai Tribe. So just really want to acknowledge that this is something I'm talking about today, but this is far from just my project. So as you can see from what I've already mentioned, this is a project that is taking place in 4 national parks, and these are 4 national parks that are each facing an real-world issue of transforming ecosystems. And these parks were chosen, one, because they were early adopters grappling with a challenge and interested in implementing the RAD framework, and because the challenges they were grappling with are largely in the space of forest transformation. So we had a really nice set of similarities, and we have the differences that these are in different parts of the country, they're different ecosystems, and each park has, you know, its own institutional context, its own way that its staff is approaching this challenge. So that is kind of the high-level overview. Next slide, please. The objectives of this project, there are objectives at the applied level for the parks, where we are trying to give each park actionable information that it can use at the park level. There are applied objectives at the level of the Park Service as a whole, where the headquarters level climate change response program is hoping to learn from this project to better help parks across the system incorporate institutional and individual level factors into decision-making. There's an aspect of that is related to how parks work with tribal nations. That's particularly around the Glacier and Confederated Salish Kootenai Tribe case study. And then there are social science goals, because this is really something that has not necessarily been thought a lot about in public land management, this sort of ecological transformation decision-making issue. And that's what Katie was talking about. Next slide, please. This is kind of speaking to that Park Service-wide objective. Resist, Accept, Direct has been really gradually but increasingly incorporated into the guidance that the Park Service is giving to its unit staff on how they think about climate change. In 2021, Park Service put out this Planning for a Changing Climate, which really has RAD in it, although a lot of the thinking so far has been more from the ecological side, and the climate change response program is really still trying to think about, all right, how do these more social and institutional factors affect how a park might actually go about this and some of the challenge they're grappling with. So that is kind of the space that we are trying to contribute and help with this project. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I guess there's an animation on this, so you might need to continue to click through for me. And one more. Thank you. And then we based the theoretical questions that we are asking around the conceptual framework that Corey presented. And so we really are focusing, and actually, I think go ahead and one more, because there should be a red circle for me. Yep. And one more, sorry, I did not realize this was all. There we go. All right. Only took 6 clicks. So we really are focusing on 2 parts of this system, because we believe that the scientific uncertainty and social feasibility, there's a little bit more known about how they might affect decision making. The first one that we're focusing on is that institutional context. And so really thinking about everything from the unit level institutional context, all the way through to the things that all parks are subject to, like NEPA, like the Endangered Species Act, like the Park Service Organic Act, and asking how that institutional context is influencing, supporting, or constraining what individual parks and managers are doing in terms of encountering ecological transformation. And then the second question we are asking relates to how those mental models and those components that Corey was explaining that fit into those mental models are playing into resist, accept, direct decision making. And one variable within that mental model that we identified is and hypothesize is particularly important is emotions. We know that decisions are not rational the way that it was formerly the way that decision-making models formerly talked about them. There's a lot from the cognitive psychology and behavioral economics literature that really says emotions play into decisions. And so one of the things that we are asking in this project is, what role do those individual level psychological and emotional factors play when encountering what can be a very challenging problem? You know, we have quotes when we were developing this of scientists talking about, I'm acting as a coroner, Park Service managers saying, you know, I've been in this place for 40 years and it's changing before my eyes. Things are disappearing on my watch. In that context of what's being called climate grief, what's being called ecological grief, how is that experience influencing what the decision-making looks like? Next slide, please. So this project relies on two data collection methods. One is individual and one is collective. The individual one, which is in progress as we speak, we've completed about 2.5 of the 4 parks, is interviews. And this is a model of the interview design where you have one person who has a background and their experiences and their mental models, and they make decisions about managing transformation. They also are part of a team within a park that provide input into park decisions, and that varies depending on their role. Obviously, a seasonal technician has a lot less influence into park decisions than the chief of resource management. And the output is what the park decides to do about ecological transformation. And all of that exists within a range of contextual factors, including those policy factors I mentioned, and also the context of relating to various stakeholders, of the scientific information, how people understand it. So this is the things we are getting at through those individual interviews. Next slide. And then those individual interviews are informing the second round of data collection, which is a collective data collection focus group workshop design that focuses on looking at the interaction between people and how their views of focal transformation and their roles interact with one another. And so the focus group asks 2 questions. One is looking at the trade-offs among a group and where there's agreement or disagreement on a focal transformation, you know, for example, managing sequoias, which is the focal transformation in Sequoia National Park. And then also the way that people within the park interact and the way that that affects the park decision-making process. Next slide. So where does that leave us on this sort of state of the social science of RAD? As Katie emphasized, managers presented with the same information scientifically select different RAD strategies, which tells us that something else is going on. These decisions are not just ecological or scientific, but they're deeply social. And so there's a range of internal and external factors that are influencing what decisions get made. And, you know, that also suggests that there's a range of social factors of stakeholders that are going to influence the decisions that stakeholders are supporting, which is where the interest in upstream deliberative engagement methods. Looking ahead, Katie, Corey, and I have work that is in preparation, thinking about how social factors may change over time. So that's something that's exciting. We are also obviously, as I've described with this Park RAD project, we're exploring how different contexts, particularly institutional, affect manager decision spaces. There's interest in developing ethical and justice aspects of RAD decisions. That's something that Wiley Carr is working on with ethics philosophy professor at University of Montana called Christopher Preston. Exploration, and then some future directions that are out there and important, but that I'm not aware of anyone actively working on right now, is really more exploration of the public and stakeholder perceptions. And if you know of people that are working on that, I'd love to hear about it, because it's something that it definitely is a need, but not something I'm currently aware of. And then this development of processes, methods, and tools for public stakeholder engagement is also one that is an important need. And again, not something I'm aware of anybody currently working on. Next slide, and I think this is second to last slide. I already mentioned by name the members of my Park RAD team, but I just want to, highlight the institutions and really emphasize, there's names on this presentation, but building theory takes a village. The development of the Resist, Accept, Direct framework, that interagency working group, was the effort of multiple federal agencies as well as other partners. And then this Park RAD project that I really am honored to be one of the PIs on has multiple institutions and support from multiple CASCs. So with that, I think we've got a slide of references and we'll open it up for questions.
Yay, awesome. Thank you three so much. There was a lot in that presentation. And even though I'm working on some of this work with you all, I still feel like I'm processing it. So if anybody has questions that they want to add in the chat, we don't have any yet. I'm going to take a moment in a second to pitch a question if nobody else does. But also please feel free to unmute yourselves at this point and put your questions to our presenters directly if you have thoughts, questions, burning desires.
We'll take chocolate chip cookie recipes too, if that's all you've got.
I was gonna say, I'm trying to be really patient and like give people a moment to chime in before I just launch in. But yeah. All right. So I'm gonna use my kind of speaker's prerogative and ask a question.
There we go, Heather. I think we've got a chat.
Oh, fantastic. Yay.
Okay, Elizabeth Woolner. Where do you think the state of the field may be in 5+ years? What might be good directions for current graduate students to investigate? Well, I'll take part of that, but then I'm going to turn it over to Katie and Corey because they're both at universities. So I think speaking to graduate students is great. I think one place that is super exciting is, so backing up a second, when we very initially started thinking about this question of what might the social science of Resist, Accept, Direct look like, we just super simple started talking about, well, okay, who matters to this? We think that the land managers matter. And I would say that that's kind of where a lot of my work has been focusing. We said we think the resource users matter. We think that the surrounding communities for land management, units like the gateway to community to a national park matters. And we think that the public at large matters. And from my point of view, and again, if there's things I don't know about, please send them my way. But those three have had a lot less work done so far. So those, how are these decisions changing, intersecting with changing expectations and preferences and desires of resource users? What is the experience of surrounding communities, particularly as there's a lot of changes with things like amenity migration that are already changing those communities. We've been hearing about that already in some of our case study parks. And then, the public writ large, which has some very strong opinions and thoughts on things like climate change. So I'll stop there and let Katie and Corey add.
I will just add one other group explicitly that maybe falls in, but are tribes, right? So tribes have a different set of rights that are really important to think through. And we know because of colonialism and dispossession, a lot of sacred sites fall on public lands managed and operated by other people. And that's part of the project of the 4 case studies, is looking at one with a tribal partner to really explore some of these questions of how might we think in a more equitable way. Again, when we're talking about opening up the decision process, bringing in other folks, a key constituency rights holder would be tribes, and thinking about how to do that in these sacred areas, particularly on species of like intense cultural importance. The one other thing I will say is not only how do we make decisions, but someone tracing how do those decisions have real consequences for people. We know there's subsistence use. We know there are different types of cultural use, identity, recreational use. We have primarily focused on, again, the decision, but like once those decisions get made, what happens and what are the downstream consequences, both intended, but also documenting unintended ones to help us learn and improve those decisions. So those are a few ideas I have.
And I have a few quick things. I'll try to keep it short. So I see that a lot of hands are going up. I don't want to take too much time. 3 things that I would say. I think that social ecological transformations, thinking about how transformations are not just ecological, but have social consequences and feedbacks, and how those intersections and feedbacks work over time, I think is going to be a really productive space for research. I also think that, as Amanda brought up, emotions play a big role in this, and sense of place. And so looking more in depth at how emotions and sense of place are impacting people's decisions. And then just to sort of highlight those equity dimensions, who gets to decide, and how does the public engagement process change when you're talking about transformations. So that's all I've got.
Heather, I think we should let you moderate because there's a lot.
Yeah, no, I'm watching because now there's like a ton of people typing stuff in chat. So we're going to go to Corinne Diggins first. And then we've got 2 questions in the chat that came up before Courtney King raised her hand. So we're going to go in that order. So Corinne, it is for you.
Thanks. So Corinne Diggins, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I'm the Southwest Regional Climate Change Coordinator. And so one of the questions I'm interested in is, obviously there's like social and political influences that might impact how a manager makes a decision. But one of the things I was thinking of, because I just visited the Hermit's Peak fire yesterday, was funding. So basically, funding resources to be able to enact some of the things that managers might want to do and how that might influence how they make decisions. So if they're more limited with funding versus if they have a surplus of funding, depending on what system they're working with. Have you guys looked at how availability of resources to implement things like RAD have influenced decision making?
This might sound obvious. Yes, it's going to matter. I think the other thing, and we're hearing that it matters. This is all, it's going to be hard for me to talk about data that is coming in now and not fully analyzed. Yes, your instinct that it matters is true. The other thing we're hearing is it's not just total availability of funding. At least within the federal system, there's a lot of things that the money exists, but it can only be spent on particular things for particular reasons. And so you have to match what you want to do to those particular reasons. And so one thing that's really interesting right now within Park Service is the new conversation about IRA, the acronym just escaped me, Inflation
Reduction Act.
Yeah, is a tremendous influx of money, but the things that can and cannot be spent on really shape whether it can play into something that might be what a park unit wants to do.
And
Yeah,
I'll just say,
yeah, I think they've seen the same thing with like the Hermit's Peak fire. They got congressional funds for that fire. But in terms of what they're able to do on the landscape and where they're able to do it is very limited by, you know, how that money has been mandated by Congress.
and that was, you know, in the conceptual framework that we had, we did think about funding, and that was under institutional like constraints. And I will just say it's both about funding available now, but then if you think over time about committing to a RAD decision, some of those are going to carry really different future costs. Potentially, if you're resisting trying to keep something in a place that is hotter and drier than it can survive, typically that's going to get more expensive. Also, the way physically labor is both a financial and just a, you know, these scalability questions really intersect with financial questions.
Awesome. Okay, so our next question is from the chat from Jamie McAvoy. So how have managers presumably trained in the biophysical sciences responded to the ideas of emotion and politics as important elements of decision making? That was a great question.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jamie. I would separate emotion and politics here. I think that, you know, politics is probably something else. I'll leave that aside for right now. At least in the places I've been working, you know, how typical they are is a different question. This is a conversation that a lot of the partners on this project are really interested in having because it matches the experience that they are having. You know, I think that this is something where things are changing. Their climate is affecting ecosystems and resources, and there is an emotional experience. And so even though, you know, when we do scientific analysis, we need it to be rigorous and unbiased, that can be true. And the fact that making decisions about the future that have implications is emotional can also be true. So I've been very, very encouraged both that a federal agency is funding this and the support and excitement that I've been finding for this work within Park Service.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, we're going to go to Courtney King. You are next in the queue if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. My name's Courtney. I was a graduate from Western Colorado University and now currently work both supporting graduate students and for the Center for Public Lands. So it was nice to see Corey Knapp's name. My kind of have two questions. I'm working with an adaptive management group that was originally started to bring in stakeholder and public feedback on a Forest Service timber sale, and then now is kind of looking at like how to move beyond that, but kind of like struggling to get the stakeholders to continue participating and stay encouraged and think about like what other avenues we can pursue. So one question would be like how to keep stakeholder engagement where it is so necessary and important. And then also part of what that group's done is try to increase public communication, but there was like a hard barrier of just one of the members didn't believe in climate change and fully wouldn't like sign off on anything that had to do. So how have any of you overcome that as a barrier if it's been a barrier?
I could address that last one because I've definitely run into that as a barrier. And I think that focusing on the management decisions that need to be made and on the manager's experience of change in their local environment is a really good way to do that. It's hard if that individual, just because it says the word climate change, isn't willing to work in that sphere, but it seems like managers are experiencing and know that things are changing and that they need to respond to that. And so I think my approach has always been starting with the experience of managers and starting with what they've seen and with what they're concerned about, and not always couching it in climate change if that's not going to be productive, but helping them answer important management questions.
I think in terms of, you raise big questions, and I will just say I don't have answers fully. They're really thorny and difficult questions. In terms of engagement, I think creating a process that has buy-in, that feels legitimate and credible, is important, right? No one wants to be part of a process that feels like it's just a check of a box. And so creating a process that actually feels respectful, creating a process where it is clear what managers are going to do with that information, and how, I always say, if you're going to ask for people's opinions, you should ask where there is flexibility in your plan. You don't want to just say broadly, tell me what you want, because, as a scientist who works with partners, they might say they want something that we just, oh, it's outside of the region I work in, I can't do that. Or, there's just constraints or timing, or you want to know what the climate is going to be in 4,000 years. That is, I don't know. Right. So you have to kind of say, here are the questions we have, and here are the places the levers we have that could, and so I think focusing really on from deliberative engagement, having some explicit conversations about how people are feeling, some of these emotional components, some of these value components, what's going on, but then also, as you're crafting alternatives, really being thoughtful about asking questions where you could actually respond to the feedback you get in an engagement process.
All right, so I think we've got about time for one more question before we reach the top of the hour. So I'm a couple of the questions kind of got some of their components answered. So I'm going to skip ahead a bit to Megan Oldfather's question of, is there work that you would suggest examining that explores how these different types of ecological uncertainty interacts with the internal components? So, that framework that you had that shapes decision making, basically where can folks go to learn more about this?
So first, I'm going to say, Megan, that I think this is a really important question, and my answer might be a teeny bit unsatisfying, but I'm going to tell you that you're at the sweet spot of one of the things that I think is most exciting about this. In the data that we're still analyzing, we are seeing that it absolutely matters. And we're starting to think about it in the idea of, there's scientific data, there's uncertainty, there's a range of possible ecological trajectories and possible ecological futures. And that affects the narratives that people use to make sense of the world, and therefore the conclusions they draw based on those narratives. So Brian Chaffin, one of our co-PIs on this Park RAD project, and a colleague of his, Karina Wyborn, who is at Australian National University, have a student who's done work in the Great Barrier Reef, and she's got a paper that is not out but should be imminently out that also found the same thing. So I can connect you with Brian, or I can make sure I send you that paper. But conversations with Karina there, with what we're seeing, it's partially a stay tuned, but it's also your instinct that it matters is absolutely correct. And I'm really looking forward to being able to tell you more soon.